Honor used to be a big deal. A really, really big deal. Such a big deal, in fact, that for centuries, men were willing to die for it in formal, deadly duels. But we're not talking about defending national secrets or avenging a fallen king. We're talking about defending their honor from insults like a badly cooked pudding, an overly shiny pair of boots, or even a fart at a dinner party. Today, we explore 44 of the most bizarre, petty, and ridiculously dumb reasons that actually led to people trying to kill each other. 1. The hot air balloon duel. Okay, so how do you handle a love triangle? If you're a normal person, you get sad or angry. If you're a French aristocrat in 1808, you challenge the other guy to combat in hot air balloons. Yes, really. These two dudes, fighting over an opera singer, floated thousands of feet into the air with shotguns, trying to pop each other's balloons. And it wasn't for show. One of them actually succeeded, sending his rival and a pilot crashing down onto a roof. It's the most dramatic, insane, and frankly impressive way to say, "She's with me now." Flowers are for quitters. 2. The sausage standoff. Otto von Bismarck was a political genius, which is a polite way of saying he was a terrifyingly clever menace. When some guy challenged him to a duel, Bismarck had the right to choose the weapons. He didn't pick guns. He picked sausages. He presented two of them, explaining that one was perfectly fine and the other was crawling with deadly parasites. His opponent could choose whichever one he wanted for lunch. The guy just stared at the potentially lethal snack, realized he was being trolled on a god-tier level, and backed down. Never get into a battle of wits with a man who weaponizes his food. 3. The delicate air incident. Some duels were fought over honor, land, or love, and some were fought over a fart. At a super formal royal dinner where everyone was probably starving and miserable, one nobleman let one rip. It probably echoed. Now, the fart wasn't the problem. The problem was that another guy at the table actually commented on it. He broke the sacred code of silence. This was such an unforgivable social foul that it had to be settled with swords. Imagine looking your killer in the eye, knowing you're about to die because someone acknowledged your butt trumpet. History is wild. 4. The mathematical duel. We've all been in a pointless argument, but at least it didn't end with facial reconstruction. The famous astronomer Tycho Brahe got into a heated fight with his cousin about who was better at math. Not about money, not about a girl, but about who was the bigger nerd. Their nerd rage got so intense they decided to duel with swords in the dark. The result? Brahe lost his nose. Like, it was chopped clean off his face. For the rest of his life, he wore a fake one made of brass, a shiny monument to the dumbest reason to ever draw a sword. 5. The billiard ball battle. In 19th century France, two guys got into a fight over a game of pool. But instead of just arguing about the rules, they decided on a duel, but they were feeling spicy. Pistols are so last year, they probably said. So they agreed to stand apart and just throw the billiard balls at each other. This sounds like a terrible idea for a comedy sketch, but it was a terrible idea in real life. One of them took a solid ivory ball straight to the forehead and died instantly. It's a good lesson: never underestimate human stupidity. 6. The cabinet minister duel. You know that feeling when you hate your coworker so much? Well, in 1809, two of Britain's top government ministers felt that way. While they were supposed to be running the war against Napoleon, they were secretly plotting against each other. When one found out the other was trying to get him fired, he challenged him to a duel. So while an actual war was happening, the guys in charge of the war effort were in a field trying to shoot each other over office politics. It's the most insane HR dispute of all time. 7. The armchair duel. Dueling etiquette was so ridiculously formal, it even had disability accommodations. A man who couldn't stand was challenged to a duel. So, did they call it off? Of course not. That would make sense. Instead, they brought out two big, comfy armchairs. They sat both men down at the proper distance, handed them pistols, and let them have at it. They literally created an accessible way to commit murder. It's proof that when a society is obsessed enough with a stupid idea, they will bend all logic to make it work for everyone. 8. The singing congressman clash. Politics is a nasty business. But in 1838, it got even nastier because someone couldn't sing. The official reason a US congressman was killed in a duel was political slander. But the rumor was that the real beef started because one of them mercilessly made fun of the other's horrible singing at a party. A man died and a federal law was passed, at least in part, because one guy was a terrible singer and the other was a bully about it. It was basically a high school cafeteria fight, but with elected officials and loaded guns. 9. The last judicial duel in France. You think the legal system is slow now? In 1547, France, they had a much faster, dumber way to settle court cases. It was called a judicial duel. This wasn't just two angry guys. This was the official, state-sanctioned method of finding out who was telling the truth. Two nobles had a legal dispute, and instead of presenting evidence, they presented swords. The king and the entire court gathered to watch them hack each other to pieces, assuming God would grant victory to the innocent party. It was basically Judge Judy, but with more blood and less common sense. It was the ultimate, "I'll see you in court," and they meant it literally. 10. The buttonhole feud. You'd think military officers would have important things to worry about, like strategy or, not getting invaded. You would be wrong. A duel was once fought between two French officers over the single most important issue of their time. Should uniform buttonholes be sewn in a round shape or an angular one? This wasn't just a suggestion, it was a hill worth dying on. One man saw angular buttonholes as a crime against tradition. The other saw them as the future of military fashion. They were so passionate about their respective sewing techniques that they decided to settle it with pistols. It's a good thing the enemy didn't attack that day. 11. The manliness duel of Proust. Marcel Proust was a famous author who wrote incredibly long, sensitive books about memory and cookies. He's the last person you'd expect to see in a gunfight. Which is probably why, when a newspaper critic basically called him a weak, effeminate poser, Proust did the most unexpected thing possible. He challenged the critic to a duel. It was the ultimate 19th century say it to my face moment. The two men met with pistols, both fired, and thankfully, both missed. But Proust had made his point. He might be a delicate artist, but he was a delicate artist who could and would try to shoot you. 12. The bad acting duel. Getting a bad review is tough. Today, you might get a mean comment on your video. In the 16th century, playwright Ben Jonson gave feedback with a sword. An actor named Gabriel Spencer apparently criticized Jonson's acting ability. This was a big mistake. Jonson, not one to take criticism well, challenged him to a duel. Spencer probably thought he was just giving some friendly notes, but he ended up dead. Jonson was arrested for murder but got out on a technicality. It just goes to show if you're going to tell someone their performance is bad, make sure they aren't a heavily armed, hot-tempered literary genius. 13. The soup showdown. The French are passionate people. They're passionate about love, art, and most importantly, their food. How passionate? A duel once erupted in a fancy Parisian restaurant because a customer tasted the soup and declared it an insult. Not just bad, but an insult. An offense to his palate, the chef, and the very honor of France itself. The chef, or perhaps another diner, took this culinary critique as a declaration of war. They didn't write a bad Yelp review, they went straight for the swords. It's a terrifying lesson. You can criticize a Frenchman's politics, but you do not criticize his soup. 14. The pudding texture duel. The British are a bit more reserved than the French, but they have their breaking points too. And that breaking point is Christmas pudding. A duel was once fought over the dessert's consistency. One gentleman, after taking a bite, declared the pudding was far too liquid. This was not taken as a helpful suggestion. It was seen as a vicious attack on tradition, family, and the Christmas spirit. The only way to defend the honor of the dessert was with pistols at dawn. It's just so wonderfully British. A deadly fight not of fiery passion but of deeply held, incredibly specific culinary standards. 15. The shiny boot duel. Sometimes you don't even have to say anything to start a duel. You just have to be stylish. A man was once challenged to a duel because his boots were too shiny. That's it. His opponent saw the dazzling reflection from his footwear and interpreted it as an act of unbearable arrogance. The shiny boots were a non-verbal way of saying, "I'm better than you and my shoeshine boy is a wizard." In an era of fragile egos, a well-polished shoe wasn't just fashion, it was a threat. The other guy felt so disrespected by the sheer glossiness of the leather that he had to restore his honor through potential murder. 16. The joke that failed duel. We've all been there. You tell a great joke, you wait for the laugh, and you get nothing but blank stares. It's awkward. But has it ever ended in a gunfight? It did once. A gentleman at a party told what he thought was a clever joke. Another man didn't get it, but instead of just admitting he was confused, his brain went into self-defense mode. He's not being funny, he must have thought. He's secretly insulting me. This complete failure of communication and social grace spiraled into a formal challenge. It is the single greatest example of someone being unable to take a joke in all of history. 17. The shared mistress rotation dispute. Two military officers once fought a duel, not because they were in love with the same woman, but because they couldn't agree on the schedule for visiting her. This wasn't a duel of passion. It was a duel of logistics. They had a perfectly functional sharing arrangement, but when one of them messed up the timetable, it turned into an affair of honor. Instead of creating a shared Google Calendar, they reached for pistols. It's the ultimate proof that men will always find the dumbest possible reason to fight, even when they're supposed to be cooperating. 18. The noisy wheels conflict. A duel was once fought between two neighbors because one man's carriage was too loud in the morning. Seriously. It was the 19th century equivalent of your neighbor revving his motorcycle at 6 a.m. After a series of angry letters didn't solve the problem of the squeaky, clattering wheels, one of them decided the noise was a personal attack on his right to a peaceful morning. This wasn't just a noise complaint to the local authorities. This was a formal challenge to a fight to the death over a bad axle. 19. The lost book retaliation. Never get between a scholar and his library. A duel was once fought for the ultimate academic crime, not returning a borrowed book. A rare and valuable book was lent from one scholar to another, and the borrower just kept it. Weeks turned into months. Gentle reminders turned into stern letters. When the book wasn't returned, the owner saw it not as forgetfulness, but as a theft of knowledge and a deep personal insult. So he challenged the book hoarder to a duel. It's like an overdue library fee, but the penalty is getting shot. 20. The shoulder bump. Standoff. Sometimes a duel started with no words at all. Imagine two proud, stubborn men walking down a narrow street and bumping into each other. That's it. That's the whole reason. Neither would apologize. Neither would step aside. They just stood there, locked in a silent battle of egos, until the situation escalated from an awkward sidewalk shuffle into a formal duel with swords. It's the most pathetic testosterone-fueled standoff imaginable, where being polite was apparently a greater weakness than risking death. 21. The doctor's disagreement duel. Two doctors once tried to kill each other because they disagreed on how to treat a patient. This wasn't a debate at a medical conference. It was a literal fight for their lives over a professional opinion. One doctor probably prescribed leeches while the other insisted on a newfangled tonic. Their argument over the patient's health became so toxic that they decided the only way to prove whose medical theory was superior was to see who was better at dodging bullets. There's no word on whether the patient survived their doctor's ego trip. 22. The pheasant border duel. A duel was once fought to the death over a single bird. Two landowners who already hated each other were hunting near the disputed edge of their properties. One of them shot a pheasant, and the bird had the audacity to fall and die right on the boundary line, Both men claimed it was theirs. The argument over one dead pheasant quickly spiraled into a full-blown affair of honor. They were apparently more willing to die themselves than to let their rival have a free dinner. It's a whole new level of get off my lawn. 23. The legal grudge match. Two lawyers, having just finished a long and bitter courtroom battle, were so unsatisfied with the judge's verdict that they decided to appeal. Not to a higher court, but to a duel. They literally took their legal argument outside and settled it with pistols. All the complex points of law, the evidence, the witnesses, it all came down to who was a better shot. It's a terrifying thought, but you have to admit, it would probably make court proceedings a lot more exciting, maybe even shorten them. 24. The cavalry horse face-off. The question of who has the better ride is an ancient one. For two cavalry officers, it was a question that could only be answered with violence. Their argument over whose horse was faster, stronger, and more magnificent got so heated that they challenged each other to a duel. This wasn't just a friendly race. This was a formal, potentially fatal duel to settle a debate that could have been solved by, racing their horses. But that would have been too simple. Instead, one of them had to die to prove his horse was the best. 25. The opera fanatic's fire. A duel was once fought between two guys because they were fans of rival opera singers. This wasn't a heated argument in a comment section. This was 19th century stan culture at its most extreme. One fan insisted his favorite diva could hit a high C better than anyone. The other fan disagreed, claiming his diva's vocal skills were supreme. The debate over who was the true queen of the opera became so personal that they decided the only way to settle it was with pistols. They were literally willing to die for their favorite artist. 26. The cribbage quarrel. You'd think a duel to the death would be reserved for high stakes. Not always. A duel once started over a game of cards where the total amount of money on the table was a few pennies. One player accused the other of cheating. The accusation wasn't about a huge financial loss. It was about the principle of the thing. The insult of being called a cheater over a game with less value than a loaf of bread was so severe that it had to be answered with violence. It's a powerful reminder that it's never about the money, it's about the ego. 27. The waistcoat duel. You can get away with insulting a man's family, his politics, or his dog, but you do not insult his fashion sense. A duel was fought because one gentleman made a snide remark about another's waistcoat. It might have been the color, the cut, or the pattern. Whatever the fashion crime, the comment was seen as a devastating personal attack. In a world where your social standing could be measured by the quality of your tailor, a bad review of your clothing was a public shaming. The only comeback was a challenge. 28. The lineage battle. Two aristocrats once dueled because they were arguing about whose ancestors were better. This wasn't a friendly chat about family history. This was a bitter fight over whose great-great-great-grandfather was a bigger deal centuries ago. My ancestor was a heroic knight, one probably said. Well, my ancestor discovered a new type of potato, the other might have replied. The debate over historical bragging rights got so intense that they had to settle it by seeing which of them would become an ancestor first. 29. The ink color duel. A man was once challenged to a duel because of the color of his ink. He was writing his letters in a flashy, ostentatious purple ink, and another gentleman saw this as an act of profound arrogance. Black or blue ink was for humble, respectable people. Purple ink was for peacocks and posers who thought they were better than everyone else. The choice of stationery was seen as a direct reflection of his moral character, and his character was clearly flawed. This wasn't just ink, this was a statement. And the statement was, I am so full of myself, someone needs to shoot me. 30. The joke theft challenge. There is no crime more serious in high society than stealing a good joke. At a dinner party, one witty gentleman delivered a perfectly crafted punchline, only to have another guest repeat it later and claim the credit. It was the ultimate intellectual property theft. The original jokester was so enraged by this plagiarism of wit that he challenged the joke thief to a duel. He was willing to risk his life to defend his copyright on a single funny comment. It's the most extreme "I'm not laughing" you can possibly imagine. 31. The wig incident. In the 18th century, a man's powdered wig was his crown. It was a symbol of status, dignity, and the fact he had way too much free time. So when one man accidentally knocked another man's wig off his head in a crowded room, it was a catastrophe. The sight of his bare, unwigged head was a moment of supreme public humiliation. The clumsy act was interpreted as a deliberate attack on his honor. Apologies were not enough. The only way to restore his dignity was to see if his opponent's head looked as good with a bullet hole in it. 32. The empty theater box battle. Two nobles arrived at the opera and saw the best box in the house was completely empty and unreserved. They both wanted it. Instead of flipping a coin or having a civil discussion, they both claimed it by right of being awesome. Their argument over who was more important and therefore more deserving of the empty seats escalated into a full-blown duel. They were willing to kill each other for a better view of a show they were now definitely going to miss. It's the ultimate first world problem, 19th century edition. 33. The parasol color. Quarrel. A duel was once fought over the color of a man's umbrella. One gentleman was strolling through a park with a pink parasol to shield him from the sun. Another man saw this and was deeply offended. In his mind, pink was not a color for a man. It was an affront to public decency. He loudly questioned the other man's masculinity based entirely on his choice of accessory. The owner of the pink parasol, quite rightly, took offense to being insulted by the self-appointed fashion police and challenged him to a duel. 34. The overlong handshake. A handshake is supposed to be a simple greeting, but for two men, it became a declaration of war. A duel was fought because one man held the other's hand for just a second too long. It wasn't a friendly grip, it was a power move. A silent, passive-aggressive attempt to establish dominance by refusing to let go. The man whose hand was being held hostage interpreted this lingering grip as a profound insult. He couldn't just pull his hand away. That would be admitting defeat. The only honorable solution was to shoot the guy. 35. The candle snuffing offense. Imagine a roommate dispute, but with deadly weapons. Two men were sharing a room for the night. One wanted to stay up and read, the other wanted to go to sleep. The one who wanted to sleep, growing impatient, simply walked over and snuffed out the other's candle, plunging the room into darkness. The reader, furious at having his story interrupted in such a rude manner, saw this as an act of war. The argument over bedtime etiquette quickly escalated into a challenge to a duel. 36. The bad fencing form duel. You'd think two professional fencing masters would be the last people to get into a real sword fight. You'd be wrong. A duel was fought between two masters not because of a personal insult, but because one of them publicly criticized the other's professional technique. He basically said the other guy's fencing form was clumsy and atrocious. For a master swordsman, this was the ultimate insult. It was an attack on his entire career and reputation. So they decided to have a very real, very unchoreographed fight to see whose form was better. 37. The scientific theory duel. Two 19th century naturalists were having a fierce debate about the correct way to classify insects. One believed a certain beetle belonged to one family, the other insisted it belonged to another. This was the pinnacle of academic nerd fights. But instead of writing angry letters to a scientific journal, they decided the most logical way to settle their entomological disagreement was with pistols. They were literally prepared to die over a beetle's family tree. It's a terrifying glimpse into a world where peer review involved firearms. 38. The flower arrangement duel. You think your local gardening club is peaceful? Think again. A duel was fought between two members of a horticultural society after one accused the other of cheating in a flower arranging competition. The accusation of improper lily placement or plagiarized petunias was so scandalous that it destroyed the fragile peace of the gardening world. Honor, it turned out, was not just about swords and pistols, but also about roses and carnations. The dispute over who had the best floral display had to be settled with bloodshed. 39. The dog custody duel. This one is almost heartwarming in a completely psychotic way. Two officers from opposing armies found a stray dog, and both of them wanted to keep it. They couldn't decide who should be the dog's owner, so they did the only logical thing. They fought a duel over it. The winner would get to keep the dog. It's a weirdly noble reason for a duel, but it's still insane. They were willing to kill each other for the love of a good boy. We have no record of what the dog thought about this arrangement. 40. The monocle misstep. A monocle was a symbol of pure upper-class snobbery. So when one gentleman accidentally dropped his, it was a moment of vulnerability. But when another gentleman then deliberately stepped on it, crushing the glass, it was an act of war. This wasn't an accident. It was a statement. It was a crunch heard round the ballroom. The owner of the now shattered monocle saw this as the ultimate disrespect. The only way to restore his honor was to challenge the monocle stomper to a duel. 41. The Shakespearean insult duel. An actor was on stage giving the performance of his life. Suddenly, a heckler in the audience shouted an insult at him. But this wasn't just any insult. The heckler used a much cleverer, funnier, and more cutting insult from a completely different Shakespeare play. The actor was so professionally offended at being outquipped by an amateur that he challenged the heckler to a duel after the show. He was humiliated not as a man, but as a performer. 42. The who goes first? Duel. The absolute peak of human stubbornness was reached when two men arrived at a narrow doorway at the exact same time. Neither would step aside. Neither would offer a polite "after you." They just stood there, locked in a battle of wills, until their pathetic standoff escalated into a formal challenge. They were both willing to die rather than show the common courtesy of letting someone else go through a door first. It is perhaps the single most pointless and idiotic reason for a duel in all of history. 43. The wrong hat duel. You walk into a party, you leave your hat on the rack. When you leave, you grab your hat. Simple. Unless you grab the wrong one. A duel was once fought for exactly this reason. A gentleman accidentally took another man's hat, and the owner of the hat saw this not as a simple mistake, but as a deep personal insult. Maybe it was a really nice hat. The mix-up, which could have been solved with a simple "oops, my bad," instead spiraled into a formal affair of honor. It's a terrifying lesson that even a simple wardrobe error could get you killed. 44. The frog's leg feud. Two Frenchmen were sharing a meal, and it came down to the final, single, delicious frog's leg on the platter. Both wanted it. What started as a polite argument over who should have the last bite quickly devolved into a bitter feud. Their desire for that last morsel of food was so intense that it became a matter of pride. Neither would back down. So they decided the only way to settle who truly deserved the frog's leg was to fight a duel to the death. One of them actually died, all for a snack that was probably cold by the time the fight was over. So, the next time you feel a surge of rage because someone left you on read or stole your parking spot, just remember, your ancestors might have started a gunfight over it. Which brings us to a serious question, and I want you to be brutally honest in the comments. What modern petty social crime fills you with that old-school duel-worthy rage? Don't hold back. If you enjoyed this expedition into historical madness, show the like button some respect and subscribe for more proof that the past was a very, very weird place.